Few things are more fundamental to us as American citizens than the idea of rights. In fact, the entire American experiment is premised on the notion of individual rights and the primacy of the individual who gives up some of his inherent rights to the collective group, and then we share together to have a government, and so I forsake some of my individual liberty for the sake of social life together. Basically, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract theory. So this is core to how we operate, this idea of the individual who has these rights. The reason where this came from and why we operate this way is kind of a long, complicated story. It goes back at least to Descartes in 1650 and the rise of the Enlightenment and the centrality of the individual. But now it has come to the point where we are in 2024, where we have the individual being the one sacred thing left in the world, kind of is how a lot of people look at this. The individual is the thing that matters most. All the things are kind of up for grabs, but the individual still counts. So the individual with rights, I would contend, is really a problem as Christians think about it. And I have said more than once in many different venues and on occasions that human beings have no rights. And this usually gets people's hackles up, and especially Americans don't like this idea very much that I don't have any rights. What are you talking about? I've got rights as an American. I've got fundamental rights as an inherent to my human being. And so I want to clarify what I mean by this, that we don't have rights. So let's start with this, kind of working this through a little bit. Does the individual matter? An individual count? And I want to be clear on this, that absolutely the individual matters. Frequently we have Christians kind of challenging the idea of individualism and rank individualism. That is a problem. But the individual matters enormously within Christianity. And in fact, Christianity is unique in the world because of all the religions in the world. I would argue that the individual probably has the most central significance in Christian confession, because God created you as a unique individual, as you are, with your very body and soul, the person that you are. That's God's design for who you are. God redeemed you as an individual, not just generic life, but you as an individual. And on the last day at the eschaton, when Christ returns again, he will raise you as you, body and soul, the unique individual that you are. So individuals matter enormously because you're not just swallowed up in some sort of divine whole or lose yourself in the divine transcendent, but you as an individual become who you are at God's creation, and you will be who you are through eternity because God will raise you as an individual. That's pretty cool. That's central to our Christian confession. But now, do you as an individual have inherent rights because of the fact that you're created by God and redeemed and will be raised by God? And I would argue, no. You don't have inherent rights because of the fact that you're a human being. You have God's grace given to you. You have gifts given to you. You live not with the idea of inherent rights that are mine because I'm a human being, but you live as a human being knowing that you are a contingent, dependent creature who lives only by the grace of God, only at the will of God, and only by his mercy. This gets some clarity by using this illustration I've used more than once, that think about standing in front of God and saying, God, I have a right, and demanding something. The very idea is absurd. When you're face to face with God, you realize you have nothing to stand on. You're living purely by his grace. That's the reality. So we don't function that way. But now, is it also true that you have rights in one sense as a creature living in this world to be able to fulfill your tasks? And that's true. And Luther will talk this way. Luther will talk about we don't have this kind of right to life or a right to demand our, caring for ourselves or our own integrity. That's not the way we think. We don't function with our worth coming from within. We function with the understanding of worth coming as a gift from God from without. And Luther got that and taught that very clearly. But then Luther also was clear that in my vocations, I have the responsibility to fulfill those vocations, and I have the tools necessary to do that given to me. So a father can say he has the right of a father to carry out his task, or a prince, a government leader, has the rights necessary to carry out his work. He's got the right of the sword. And a student, even, we can say, has the right to be able to learn and to be able to acquire knowledge and to learn and be able to do this. He has this right because his vocation as a student demands it. But we don't, though, turn around and demand our rights. That's just not how we function as Christians. We don't ever run around saying, I'm owed this, or you owe this to me. Rather, we simply carry out our vocations and then use the rights, the privileges God has given us to be able to fulfill those vocations. That's how we operate. So Christians, I would say, should have a different attitude than the average American way of thinking about my rights, what I'm owed, and focusing on self. And that probably is the biggest concern I have of all. When we function with individualism and rights, we're always thinking about self. And life is revolving around me and how things work for me and how I'm getting what I deserve or I'm doing what I want to do. Christians don't live that way. Luther was so clear on this. Christians live with an outward look. Christians live in grace. We receive from God what God gives, and Christians live in service. We give to those around us freely what we need to give to them because of our vocational responsibilities. What we don't do is try to figure out what is working for me, what serves my purposes, what makes my life happier, what makes me fulfilled. This focus on me is antithetical to Christian confession. Christians, instead of focusing in on themselves, Luther defined that as sin, and he called it being curvatus en se, curved in on self. That's the core of sin. Instead of living curved in on yourself, curling up like a pill bug, you are cracked open and live openly out to the world around, receiving from God what he gives, and then giving to your fellow creatures what you owe them because of your vocational responsibilities. So, demanding rights? No. Receiving what God gives? Absolutely. And so as an American, I've got these Bill of Rights that are part of the Constitution. I can receive those and take advantage of those and be grateful for the gifts that those are to me and use those well for the sake of my witness to the world and my proclamation of the gospel and my doing of my vocations. But I don't see those as somehow inherent to me that I must fight for or defend. I see them as gifts given by God through the state. Just like any other gifts given to me by God, I receive graciously and with thanksgiving, praising God for what he does for me, and then willingly serving those around me as God has directed me to do. That, I think, is how a Christian looks at this idea of rights and the place of the individual, recipients of God's grace, givers of God's gifts.